All right, so I've also started to record the meeting just in case anyone was unable to attend today for whatever reason, potentially they're teaching or have other commitments, that we will post this and you can come back and check it out at a later date. All right, so I think with that, we'll start our session for today. So thank you everyone for coming. It's really nice to see everybody, even if it's virtually. And for those of you who are at the first time for mentoring, welcome. We hope to see you many more times after this. My name is Joanna Mackay. I am the WOTP Project Development Officer. And my co-presenter today is Marcia. Did you want to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Marcia Gouette. I work at the Ministry of Education in the department that supports the English school network in Quebec and in the WTP and a few other areas. And but Joanna's being generous. I'll be here for your support, of course, but she'll be doing most of the presenting.
We're a duo.
Thank you for coming. Yeah, we're a team.
So, okay, so with that, we'll start. Today's session is going to be on end-of-year evaluation and reporting for WOTP. This is obviously a very timely and relevant session given where we are in the year and that those third-term report cards are needing to be done as soon as possible. However, I just want to preface today's meeting with the following. So the information that we're going to present today is based on what we know as of June 18th, 2020. And I say that because the ministry has not yet put out the annual directives, which could possibly alter some of the things that we are going to speak about today. But we know that our WOTP community needs some support in terms of what this is going to look like for you, reporting for your pre-work students and your semi-skilled students rather at the end of the year. But we can also definitely speak to the change in certification hours, which came out like a couple of weeks ago now. However, in terms of the actual reporting piece, we're really just going on the best information that we have available to us based on what is currently in GPI, which was given to school boards through GRICS. Okay, so all that to say that if the annual directives come out today, as soon as the session is over, they may contradict what we say today. But as of now, this is how we see reporting going.
And can I just make one just a minor clarification? The instruction annuelle to which Joanna is referring, it's an amendment to the 2019-2020 annual directives. That those, the annual directives for 2019-2020 were put on the ministry website last August. This is an amendment to it based on the COVID situation.
Yes. Okay. So with that, all right, I just need to figure out how to, there we go. Okay, so with that, here's the agenda for today. First, we're going to talk about the framework of evaluation, which really is the crux of how we do the evaluation piece. Then we'll look at that individually for pre-work students in terms of what happens during a typical year for evaluation and how that's reported on the provincial report card. Then we'll specifically look at how that's going to change due to the COVID situation this year for both reporting and the certification piece. And then we'll do the same thing as we look at training for a semi-skilled trade. So just to note, if you have any questions, if you could either put your hand up or write them in the chat, Michelin is going to monitor that, and I'll take some natural pauses to answer any questions that you have as the session continues. Thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to start with this by saying that there's some new resources that are out on Learn, which could potentially help you with your evaluation just in general. I prepared these documents a while ago, and for right now, I only have them done for the career development courses. And for now, they're only posted for pre-work because we're having some difficulties posting them on the semi-skilled page, but those will be live sooner rather than later, I hope. And if you're in desperate need for them, you can always just email me and I will send them to you. So what each of these are is just a summary of each of the programs in terms of the program competencies, the key features, the learning targets, and the evaluation criteria, as well as the program content and resources. It's all summarized in a pretty coherent document. So this is good for, I think, anyone who's teaching those career development courses, and especially people who might be a little bit unfamiliar with the program, or if you're new to teaching those courses. So I'll just take you there so you can see what that looks like. So this is to what I am referring. So this is the document for work skills, where it has the first competency with the key features, and then the learning targets, like the students will be able to, and then identifiable criteria for which you can evaluate your students on when they're on the work study.
I don't think we can see it, Joanna.
Oh, you can't see it?
No.
Okay, I will try again. Thank you, Alex. Better? Yeah, okay. So this is what this looks like. It's really just a simple summary of the program content. Nothing here has been altered from what's already existing within that curriculum. It's just in a more, I think, readable form as a summary. So it goes through these kind of checklists for what the learning targets are as already identified within the program content. And then here it also has the program content kind of summarized rather within these different learning process phases. So those are available to everyone on our Learn website, where all of our resources are shared. So I just wanted to take a minute and share that with you. All right, so are there any questions about those documents?
And just to repeat what Joanna said, there are two similar documents, the prep for the job market and preparation for a semi-skilled trade, for the training for a semi-skilled trade option. And we've just had a glitch with Learn. We have them, they're ready. If you're a TST teacher in either of those two career development courses, we can get those to you. Thank you.
Those are housed under curated resources, I believe.
No, these are in teaching and learning resources. If you go onto the pre-work page, there are purple banners. The first one is teaching and learning resources.
Okay. So those could help you out now, or potentially at the beginning of next year when you're planning your year.
And since you mentioned curated resources, I'll put in a plug for another document that we created recently, which is in the curated resources section. It's a listing of online resources to use in WOTP. We don't know exactly what the world of school will look like for WTP students yet in the fall, but it's a good start in terms of looking at some online resources. So that's a total aside, but that one's in the curated resources. And if you haven't spent some time on our pages on Learn, please do so. We've put lots of good things there for you, all in one place. One section for pre-work and one section for semi-skilled. I will shut up. I'm sorry, Joanne.
Don't worry. That's where all of the WOTP mother load is there. So I'm going to talk about it.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so first of all, we're going to just talk about the framework of evaluation. So these exist for every single subject and really outline the criteria in which you are evaluating and the weighting of each competency within that subject. They also describe or on the ministry website, explain the different exemptions that students in pre-work and semi-skilled have from the basic school regulations, which I'm going to get into in a moment. And so it's really important that when you are doing the evaluation of learning, that you are looking at the framework of evaluation to guide you in this process. So we'll just take a moment to look at one of these frameworks so that you are aware of what this looks like. So I chose the one for work skills, and I have a double reason for doing this. One, because just as an example, so here it talks about the role of evaluation, the organization of knowledge and evaluation, the organization of the frameworks, the teacher's role in evaluation, and then specifically the evaluation of learning and work skills. So what's important here is it says, in order to successfully complete the work skills program, students must satisfy the program requirements with respect to the competencies, and then they list the competencies. These competencies each have the same weighting in the calculation of the final subject mark. And for the competency, develop specific competencies associated with one or more semi-skilled trade, students must demonstrate proficiency in at least 7 competencies. So when we talk over and over again at mentoring, when we're looking at a student's training plan, this is where the 7 competencies come from the framework of evaluation for work skills. So just a little tidbit of information. It's not like we're just kind of pulling this out of nowhere. This is really from the framework of evaluation. Okay, then it goes on, and you can see all these charts, etc., where there's equivalent weighting in the calculation of the subject mark. All right, so this exists in WOTP for every subject. I just want to make a note that on the ministry site, the framework of evaluation for FSL and for ELA is not correct. I think it's just a direct translation from French because they have French first language and English as a second language. So and that's for semi-skilled. So just please note that and look at the regular secondary 1 ELA and FSL framework of evaluation. I found that gem out the other day when I was looking. So
yeah, and we have the correct ones. On the website. And the other thing is that no, we don't, because we link to the website, right? Yeah, okay. But if you don't have if you need the correct framework of evaluation for a given course that you're teaching, your consultant should have it, and if they don't, I have them all, so we can get them to you. And that error on the ME's website, I've asked for it to be corrected, and it still hasn't been corrected, so I'm very sorry about that. Unfortunately, I can't control that.
So we are aware, but we don't control the back end of these things, so we just try and keep bothering people to change this stuff so that it's right. In any case, like Marcia said, if you need any clarification or stuff sent to you, you can always email myself or Marcia, your consultant, and we'll help you out as soon as possible. All right, so that is a huge part of evaluation just in general at any time is the framework of evaluation for learning for each subject. So we're going to start and we're going to look at pre-work to start with. And like I said, first, we're just going to talk about what the evaluation and reporting looks like in a regular school year, and then what changes have been made in 2019-2020 because of COVID-19. All right, so as I had mentioned, the annual directives typically point out the exemptions that students in pre-work and semi-skilled have from the basic school regulations. So when I talk about exemptions, I'm referring to exemptions from these regulations. And the first exemption is the group average. So as we know, our students in pre-work we do not report an average on the report card. So that's all that means. Secondly, that the weighting for each term and the expression of marks as percentages does not happen in pre-work. All right, so we know that this is the table that we use, the rating scale for pre-work, which is unique to us in terms of reporting in the letter grades. But I also want to go, can I go back? Yes, to just say also too that the weighting for each term, in a typical subject, let's say in secondary 1 English, each term is weighted, and I'm just going to give it a random weighting. I don't know exactly what it is, but just to give you an example, let's say it's 20-20-60, where the mark that you entered, which I think is correct, but Marsha's nodding. So 20% of first term mark and 20% of second term mark and 60% of term 3 mark and probably 20% of your final exam make up your overall mark in that course. For pre-work students, that is not the case. The terms are not weighted. So each time you're looking at the student as they progress through the competencies, what you are evaluating and reporting on is how that student is doing at this moment. And the reason for this is because we're really looking at competency development. So Marcia had used in a previous time we were talking about this, the example of a swimming lesson. So let's say we have a student who refuses to get into the pool for term 1 and they get like a D because they can't do anything. All right, they're refusing to get into the pool. They're not meeting any requirements. But after some, skilled teacher moves, they decide to finally dip their body in the water in term 2 and begin to doggy paddle. So we give them a C. Still not a pass, but they're definitely doing better. Now let's say this kid has had, his parents take him to the pool after school. He's having a lot of confidence. He realizes he loves swimming and he's doing amazing. In term 3, we're basing our evaluation specifically on what that student is capable of doing now. So that kid in my mind would get either an A or a B. Let's go for an A. He was pretty good. So all that to say that there's no weighting. What happened in term 1 and term 2 has no bearing on where the student is at. Well, I mean, it does. They've definitely led up to there. But in terms of the calculation of the grade, we're strictly looking at how they're performing in term 3. Hence the no weighting for each term. Does that make sense? Are there any questions there? Okay, I can't see all of you, so I'm just going to give it a couple seconds if Michelin says that there's someone else. But I'm getting some, okay. All right, so and all that to say as well, the pre-work letter grade rating scale is as follows. We have the A, B, C, D, and a pass mark is in a given subject corresponds to a score of A or B. So if a student receives an A or a B, they pass the course. A C or a D is a fail. So it's pretty straightforward. Okay, so this is a little bit more complex, but not really. It's just when we're looking at subjects that will not be taught the following year. So I have those listed for you on the left. So in year 1, that's going to be Introduction to the World of Work and Technical and Science, essentially, TSE. In year 2, that's FSL, PE, and PE, but I think it's also really important to note here that each year in pre-work has 50 hours of unapportioned time. And so typically schools will use that for French or for phys ed or for whatever you want. But all that to say that it's going to be individual to your school, what you use that 50 hours of unapportioned time for. All that to say that you may have French in year 3, or you may have science in year 2, or you may have these things in other years because there's a little bit of leeway in terms of what that extra time is within your schedule at your school. So just pay attention or note what you're using that 50 hours of unapportioned time for. But within the actual BSR, FSL, and PE are finished as of year 2. And then in year 3, it's going to be all of the subjects, which would be ELA, math, GHC, autonomy and social participation, preparation for the job market, and work skills that need that final mark. So we can see that the scale for the final mark, just the wording is a little bit different, but it's very similar in the meaning as the typical rating scale. So we're just now commenting on if the student meets the program requirements. So in the case of subjects that will not be taught the following year, the final mark on the end of your report card must be expressed using the following rating scale. So I was doing a little bit of research yesterday and looking, so on your report card, you have 1, 2, 3 terms, and then there's a final mark, and that will be the overall final mark for that course, which will appear on the report card, if I'm not mistaken.
Joanna?
Yes, Steve.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, the teachers will actually see term 4. So in there, when they actually input in a IGPI, they'll see term 4. On the report card, it will actually list as final mark.
Final mark.
So that 4th term will actually have to be opened by your school. So typically you don't have 2 terms open at one time. So they'll enter the 3rd term 3 mark, and then they'll have to have term 4 open, which is a separate mark altogether, which is what Joanna's talking about right now, which is your final mark, term 4. And just one other note in related to the French, as Joanna said, the French and the phys ed don't have, if your school is offering that in French or phys ed in year 3, you're not going to have a separate subject code. There is no subject code for a 3rd year French in pre-work or a 3rd year phys ed in pre-work. It likely will be what we use at Western Quebec is the exact same code. We actually use the year 2 code and then year 3 code. Your school board may do something different, but the point being is that it doesn't exist in the bulk of courses. So if you're confused about that, it'll show up potentially as something different in year 3, but that's all I need to say.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. Are there any other questions about pre-work training and the final mark for subjects that will not be taught the following year?
Can I just make 2 comments? Just, if this were not the year of COVID, the other thing to remember too is that your, say, year 1 courses, Introduction to the World of Work or TSE, in the first 2 terms, you would use the first grid of A, B, C, D, and then the final mark would be this 2nd grid. And just so that everyone's clear, in this grid, where you went back to Joanna and then moved back again, where it says meets the requirements set for him or her, I'm assuming everyone understands that, those are the requirements set for him or her where? In their IEP, okay? Because every student in WOTP must have an IEP, excuse me.
Yeah.
This is old news, but sometimes it's really good to, go over the basics again and again, because it's a lot to remember.
Okay, there's a question in the chat box. Where is the 50 hours in year 3?
The 50 hours of unapportioned time in year 3?
Yeah.
Honestly, that is up to each individual school. So that would be something that teacher would have to ask their principal what they've decided to use that 50 hours for. Now, in a lot of cases, when I was teaching WOTP, I guess this just depends on your student population. We typically did either FSL in the 3rd year or maybe more math, depending on the student need. But other schools I know have a totally different course where they're teaching something like mechanics, or not mechanics, but there's some, I can't remember the name of the actual course, because it's like an independent course. There's no curriculum for it, but the student, it exists in the Bible of course codes. But it depends on the individual school.
Joanna, it's Marco.
Yes, hi Marco.
Hi, so that was my question. We maybe teach PJM in French in year 3. Can we do that? Because it's a 2-period course. I guess it's about 50 hours.
Well, see, all of those courses listed, Marco, in year 3, those all must be taught. Then there's an extra 50 hours. So that could mean another like 2 or 3 classes in ELA, or, well, there's already a lot of ELA, I think, in year 3 of PWT, if I'm not mistaken, math or something else. So I don't know, you really have to look at your subject time allocation for year 3 for pre-work to figure out where that 50 hours went.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say that, I mean, when the WOTP was first created when the reform was implemented and this new program was created, like everything else, it was created in French and translated into English. And when they realized that in year 3, some of the quote unquote academic courses would have to drop out because of the large stage of 600 hours, in the French sector, they didn't really feel like, dropping out English as a second language would be a big problem, right? Because it's kind of not their priority. Whereas in the English sector, the French as a second language is much more important for our kids, because if we're talking about preparing them for work, we're talking about preparing them for work in Quebec. So that's why many people do choose to take that extra 50 hours and use it for French, but you don't have to. But your idea, Marco, of doing the prep for the job market course in French, that's kind of like immersion, which is a very neat idea. The curriculum is there in French. I would just caution you that, again, it's as Joanna says, it depends on the needs of your school, and reality is your principal is going to say it depends on the staffing too, who the principal has available to teach X, Y, or Z. But the other thing is, you would want to make sure that your students are all in a position to be able to understand well enough, that because you don't want them to lose what they need in that course because of a language issue. And that would really depend on your students. Maybe if it was blended sort of English, French, that could be a possibility too.
Okay, thank you. So I guess we'll have to look at our specific school to figure out how to do this in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions in regards to this?
Would it ever be possible to open up that 50 hours to students selecting a general elective course from the school where they could sit in on a quote unquote regular stream class?
That's a good question. I don't know logistically how that would work. I mean, maybe in your case you have a big school, it could maybe fit into this. I guess it would just depend what it was, right? Because we're talking about kids in pre-work, and if you're in a high school where we're starting at secondary, maybe even 1 or 3, these kids are typically working below that level. Maybe if it was like a phys ed class, that would work, or an art class. That would probably, I think that's been done where they've been integrated into a regular art class, just because they want to, instead of being 2 students, be, 20 students, just maybe a better experience. But yeah, so that's that answer. But I think it would be tough though, just given where we know these kids typically, where they are in terms of their comprehension and understanding of grade level material, especially secondary 1 through 5. But again, if it was, PE or art or any other kind of elective class that your school offers, if you have like a machine shop or a woodworking shop, those might be options. Maybe you had a question?
Just an add-on, Joanna, just to sort of help with this, we have done that before, but what we've done is actually added, added a separate pre-work art which actually then gives them an ABCD, which means that the teacher needs to understand that it is a modified art. So it is a modified course. So it addresses what Joanna was talking about in relation to the student. The student then doesn't have to be necessarily evaluated on the specific, on the competencies for, you know, a grade 10 art student or whatever it may be. But the teacher would then have to be, you know, fully explain what the ABCD legend means, you know, in relation to that evaluation. But that also means by creating that course has to be created in GPI, actually has to be created so that you can actually add a ABCD. But what it means is it means that instead of just putting the regular subject code in, it won't work. It won't actually, the art teacher, as an example, couldn't put a percentage mark in there because it wouldn't show on the actual ABCD report card. So I've made sure that if students are doing, schools are doing that, I've made sure that they actually have created it so that the student can then actually see an evaluation related to what they're doing in that course. Otherwise, it just doesn't show up. So that is
in GPI then, just to get a little bit more specific, I think would have their own section, right? They would have, the student would, that there'd be 2 sections within that teacher's class, and then the student in pre-work, because they'd have their own rating scale, would just be on their own in a different list of students.
Because don't forget, Alex, you're talking about 50 hours, which is the equivalent of 2 credits. So you're looking at, you know, what options would be available that are 2 credits, you know, to fit them in a time slot where they would be potentially with other students of their age cohort or whatever. And but the example Steve gives is great because, you know, boards can create what they call local programs. So that's what they have done by creating pre-work art. It's a special local program. And if you, as he says, if you put in Sec 4 art, you're going to cause a problem. And if you put in something like math or English and they're above level, then you're creating a really big problem, because then you're saying that the student, if, for example, you put down the students capable of doing Sec 3 math, they can't be in the WOTP. So you've got to be very careful what goes down on paper in regards to those 50 hours.
Yeah, they won't earn the credit, and it won't actually ever come into a transcript and so on and so forth. So you get into trouble that way.
Yeah.
And then the other piece, of course, is that those students in year 2 and year 3 are going out on work placements. The teacher has to completely understand that student will be actually absent for a good portion of the year related to year 2 or year 3. So. Well,
like I said, it's doable, but can be logistically a nightmare depending on your situation. But it has, if you have, if it works, right?
Thank you very much.
Any other questions about this? All right. So like I said, this is what just happens any given year. This is the evaluation and reporting for pre-work. Now we're going to look at what this, based on the information that we have, is going to look like for 2019, 2020 because of COVID-19. All right, sorry, this is the other exemption. I got a little bit ahead of myself, that students you do not have to include exam mark within the calculation of their final mark. So we know that our students do not need to sit in for exams, and that exam does not need to be counted like other students for 20% of their final mark. So this is another exemption that exists for students from the BSR who are in pre-work. All right, so this is what, like I said, as far as I know from all of the information that I've gathered and people I've spoke to, what this is going to look like for this year. So it's basically going to be exactly the same as every other year. So for pre-work, students will continue to be evaluated on the letter grade rating scale that you see in front of you. With the A, B, C, or D, where A or B is a pass and C or D is a fail. So you will assign a term 3 mark using the letter grade rating scale as usual, and that a passing mark is A or B. So there is not, and this is for subjects that are not finished this year, okay? So this is what this looks like for pre-work. Now I know that in the Gazette that came out for, and it said that for secondary 1 to, I don't know, X students, that you would use the pass, no pass, not evaluated rating scale. This is not, from what I understand, this is not going to be the case for pre-work, even though they are secondary, 1 students. All right, is there any questions about that? All right, and then like we just spoke about, in the case of subjects that will not be taught the following year, the final mark for the year-end report card will be expressed using this rating scale. So you will have to assign a term 4 mark, so the overall program mark, like Steve had referred to, in a separate column that needs to be opened up by your GPI person. And you're going to use the letter grade rating scale for subjects that will not be taught the following year as usual. And then a passing mark, again, is an A or a B. All right, so are there any questions or comments or concerns about that? All right. Okay, so this there has been a change with, which Marcia and I had written an article about this and published it on the WordPress blog. And I'm sure you've heard from all of your consultants in terms of the change to the number of hours for certification. So when we talk about certification and the changes of these hours, we are specifically referring to students who are currently in pre-work training year 3. Now, that is not to say that we're not concerned about the kids in pre-work 2 who have also probably had less hours. They were definitely not able to complete the required hours, but the changes in the BSR for those students, is like another BSR change is going to be made next year, all that to say, to account for the students next year who are going to be certified. But specifically, when we're looking at this chart, we're talking about students who are currently in pre-work training year 3, who are going to be certified this year. And as we know, certification in pre-work is based upon the completion of the work skills program. So typically, a school year has 900 hours. In all of the subjects, if you total it up, the amount of time those kids are in school is 900 hours. This year, there has been a change because of COVID-19 that the number of hours in school has been reduced to 550. Okay, so the required hours that these students will have needed to have last year in year 2 is the same, it's 300. Okay, so those kids, because last year was a typical year, they're still required to have those 300 hours, or the competency level, even if that was before 300 hours, but we're just looking here at the numbers. And then this year, in year 3, 2019, 2020, instead of the typical 600 hours, these kids are they're only required to do 300 hours. So half the hours that they would have been required to do in a typical school year, for a total of 600 hours in total. Now, I say that, and I also want to mention that yes, the hours are important, but it's also important that the kids are able, that we can say from those 7 competencies from the Directory of Semi-Skilled Trades, that they are competent and able to complete those 7 competencies. That we have observable behavior that we have documented from the workplace supervisor, that we have spoke to, that shows that these kids are competent in those 7 individual competencies from the Directory of Semi-Skilled Trades. So yes, the hours are important, definitely, but it's also important that we're saying that these kids are competent. So if we have, able to keep a workspace clean as one of the competencies, because it exists like a gazillion times in the directory, that student has shown observable behaviors that they are able to do that. All right. So are there any questions about the change in certification for pre-work for 2019-2020? All right. Okay, so now we're going to look at training for a semi-skilled trade, which is the other program within WOTP. So this is a one-year program. So when we're referring to the training for a semi-skilled trade, this is the student's only year that they have existed within this program, because it is a one-year program. Students may be completing a second certificate in a different trade, and they could be doing the second year of training for a semi-skilled trade, but it only takes 1 year to become certified in training for a semi-skilled trade. So again, with as the same as pre-work students, the training for a semi-skilled trade students are exempt from a group average, so that is not listed on the report card. They are also exempt from the ministry exams. Now, students can, write them if they choose to, just so that you as a teacher can use it in part of your evaluation. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to use a past exam from secondary 1 or secondary 2 in math, English, or French, that's your prerogative as the teacher. You choose the evaluation tools. But if you do use that exam, you are not obliged to count that in as 20% of that student's final mark. If the kid does do it, you probably do want to use it as an assessment, because it's a lot of work for everybody. But you're not obliged to use that as 20% in the calculation of the student's final mark. Okay. And for TST report card results, the results are recorded in percentages. So it's the same percentage that would be used for secondary 1 or secondary 2 math, English, French, and the same with the career development courses, preparation for the job market and preparation for a semi-skilled trade. All of those marks are going to be expressed in percentages, where 60% and above is a pass, and anything below that would be considered a not pass. Okay. So for what we know for this year for training for a semi-skilled trade, based on the information we have today, June 18th, 2020, pre the annual directives being published, the amendments to the annual directives for this year based on COVID, this is what we know the evaluating and reporting is going to look like for this year. So, like most other kids in secondary 1 and secondary 2, you will enter a term 3 final mark. So this is going to be did the kid pass or not evaluated? So this is the final grade that this student is going to receive by either pass, no pass, or not evaluated. Where a pass means that you've collected enough evidence to support your judgment that a student has reached the competency or not, and that a not evaluated means that you don't have enough evidence to say that the student passed or didn't pass, so it's not evaluated. And then there is no term 4 mark to be entered. So really, from what we understand, based on our conversations with people who enter or who work in GPI and the information that we have at hand, is that this term 3 final mark that you are entering, which will be a pass, no pass, or not evaluated, is essentially going to be the final mark for this subject for this student. So for example, if you have a student and you're teaching ELA and you have enough evidence to say that for, let's say it's secondary 1, that's what you're working on, that student is competent in that they've attained the target level of competency in secondary 1 English, you give them a P. If they have not, it would be an NP. If this kid hasn't handed anything in ever and you have no evidence to know what they're doing, or they've never showed up, you have to give them an NE. Okay? And again, because of that, there's no term 4 mark that is going to be entered. Now, unlike pre-work, there is weighting of the terms in semi-skilled, as far as I know, where it's 20, 20, 60. So all that to say, because this is 60%, if they pass, no pass, or not evaluated, then the system calculates it on that final grade. I don't know if that's relevant in this case, but I'm just saying that they're not exempt from the weighting of terms as the pre-work students are. Okay. So are there any questions on this? Or has anyone heard anything different up until this point? Or they look in GPI and Joanna, this is not at all what my GPI looks like.
Joanna, there's a couple of questions in a more general sense. Will you be making this PowerPoint and the recording available?
Yes.
Okay, and Angela joined us late. She had to teach. Is it possible to email the presentation?
I probably won't be able to email it because it's too big.
Yes.
I will, we will publish it and make it available to the general public for their viewing, and we will send that link to all of the people at today's session, as well as the consultants for WOTP, who can then share it with the WOTP community.
Okay.
This is, I'll just jump in. This is considered one of our mentoring sessions, pardon me. So anything that we create from the mentoring sessions, if you were at the last online session, the PowerPoint, that we put everything in the professional development section on Learn, on our pages in Learn. And when the session like this is for both pre-work and semi-skilled, you can find it in both sections. And because there are a couple people that have come in since we started, we had asked at the beginning to make sure that you put in the chat your full name and your school name and your school board. Please and thank you.
Sean, you had a question?
Yeah, well, no, I wanted to make a comment on your report cards. So I'm not sure if it's exactly the same. I'm the principal of the 2 schools up in Muskogonish, and we've met a couple of times now regarding what the ministry has decided for everything from pre-K to secondary 3.
Yeah.
And so secondary 1 to 3, basically it's based on term 1 and 2, and if they were passing, then they put a P for pass. But if there are competencies, they would have to go through, for example, you said ELA. So did they pass the competency for reading or for writing or whatever? So it's PPP. And then
Yes.
the final thing is P. But we were told that it's either, in the final mark, it's either P or F. There is no NE. That's what we were told, at least for the regular.
Yeah. And I had also read that yeah, like you said, that for each competency, you would put the P, NP, NE, and then the final mark for that course would be entered either P or NP, like the kid either passed or they didn't. It's not that it's not evaluated. But from what I know for WOTP, that term 4 mark does not have to be entered because it's a 1-year course. Like this is just, their kids are in this program for 1 year. That term 3, whatever you enter into term 3, I'm guessing is going to act like a term 4, even though it's not a term 4.
And there's no waiting. And there's no waiting.
There's no waiting.
No.
This year. But typically, in a typical year, the terms are weighted 20-20-60.
Joanna, I've had some questions about that. I think, and I'm just, while we were talking, I was just trying to check some of my documents, but I think maybe in semi-skilled, the terms are actually weighted 30, like 33. They're equally weighted. And my reasoning or thought on that was because of the work placement situation. If a student actually went out in term 3, for instance, and you couldn't evaluate. Anyway, I know it's a bit moot today. Like what we're really talking about is this year and this weird year and so on and so forth in relation to and if there is no weighting, then we're good this year. But anyway, it's a bit of a side point. But I had thought at one point that it was 33, like equally weighted all the way across. But anyway, It's not a.
You know what, Steve, you could be correct. I got that just from my contact. But again, it's not something that I've like looked into apart from this year because of the situation that we're in. But it would make sense if it was equally weighted because of the work study, just because of the nature of semi-skilled. But that's definitely something I think we could talk about and look into so that we know 100% what that is moving forward.
Yeah, it might be a good thing for us to look into. And I know we're kind of talking about a bit of a sidebar here, but it might be something really, especially when we're looking at, potentially a weird year, not potentially, it will be a weird year next year. But whatever that looks like in relation to if the students are in school and all that sort of stuff, and then the work placement piece and all that piece is it, and then related to what they're going to do related to evaluation. We want to be very concerned, very cautious about that. If there is some sort of a weighting scenario, that nothing is carried over, that the student then doesn't pass simply because they're out on a work placement or simply because there is no teacher doesn't have the evidence to evaluate and so on and so forth. So want to give these kids an opportunity. They're only in school for about half in academic piece for about half the school year. So we want to be really, really cautious that we're not dinging them for that reason. They're actually being forced out into a work placement situation, so they shouldn't be dinged in relation to their other academic piece. So anyway, sidebar.
Thank you. All right, so just again, that term 3 final mark is going to be the PNP-NE based on the evidence that you have from term 1 and term 2, since term 3 was a bust. And that there is no term 4 mark that has to be entered. Again, this is what we know as of today. If things change and when we get those annual directives, we will share, but this is what the info that we have, and the school year is almost over, so we definitely have to talk about it a bit. All right, so with that, we'll look at the changes to certification for training for semi-skilled trade students in 2019-2020. As with pre-work, the certification for students is based upon the successful completion of the career development programs, which in this case of semi-skilled are preparation for the job market and preparation for a semi-skilled trade. In a typical year, those account for 450 hours combined. Preparation for the job market being 75 hours, and preparation for a semi-skilled trade where the students are out on stage being 375 hours. So typically that would be 450 hours that the student would be in class for preparation for the job market and out doing their practicum in the preparation for a semi-skilled trade course. But this year, the required hours have been reduced to 250 hours for both of those courses combined. A minimum of 250 hours, I should say. But again, as with pre-work training, when we're looking at the competencies within that specific trade, the non-optional competencies, the hours are just important as us as being able to say that the student is competent in those competencies. As much as, given the situation we're in. Okay? And again, just as in pre-work, a typical school year has 900 hours, and the total hours has been reduced to equal to or greater than 550. Okay. Are there any questions on that for certification for this year?
Yeah.
All right.
I thought I heard a voice.
Oh, I think you're just hearing my husband talking on the phone, my office buddy.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry, this is our home office. Okay, so does anybody have any, I know this is, I'm sure, how everyone's feeling right now. Okay, so I see that Tara and Adriana have a raised hand. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can look at your lovely faces. All right, so Tara and Adriana, go for it.
Hi, just a quick question. You had mentioned that the hours and the competency level, like the teacher judgment based on their competency level, are just as important. That being said, if we have a student who is under the 250 hour, but they have shown competency, are they still able to be given a pass grade?
Yes.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Okay.
It's not related to grading. It's relating to the fall. The ministry sent out a plan, but WOTP was not included in that plan. I'm just wondering if we fall into the category of secondary 3 or secondary 4 and 5. I don't know if you know the answer to that question, but could we ask?
Plan as to, I'm not sure 100% specifically referring to, Marco?
Are we expected to be going back in the fall, and are we, like, where do we fit in? Do we fit into the secondary 3 mold where the students are going to be in the same classroom every day and the teachers are going to move around? Or are we looking at the secondary 4 and 5 model where we could be school and outside of school?
I don't have an answer for that, Marco, but, and I don't know. I don't know the answer, but I'll make an educated guess, which would be that you would most likely, I assume, be like the secondary 3, just because of the general context of WOTP in a normal year, that typically your kids are one cohort and the teachers move around, like, you know what I mean? Like they're cohorts of students. And you're kind of a school unto yourself, but I don't know. And I'm imagining that will probably be up to your principal as to where you would fit in that. But again, that's just an educated guess. I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe Marcia would know.
Yeah, well, yeah, Marco, one thing to always remember about WTP, that regardless of what program these students are in, what reading level they're at, the WOTP is a secondary cycle 2 program. If you look at page 24 in chapter 1 of the QEP, there are 3 options for secondary cycle 2: general education path, applied general education path, and the work-oriented training path, which has its 2 options. So because of their age, they're 15 and up. Now, that doesn't directly answer your question, Marco. One of the problems, and I work at the ministry and I get very, very frustrated because the department I work for, we're helping the Anglo network. We don't make the decisions. And often what happens, and I've seen this over and over and over again, is that decisions are made and then WTP, it's not just WTP, it's challenges and CAPS, all the programs that are considered for the special needs students get kind of are an afterthought. And that is shameful. And we heard, we saw on for example, when they created the platform for resources when COVID first started for open school, there was nothing for WOTP, those kinds of things. So there should be some clarifications, Marco, eventually on what return to school means for WOTP and the other special needs options. The fact that this just in the last few weeks, an announcement came out on a Thursday that the following Monday, which was what, the 1st of June, that, you know, WTP students were expected to go back to school, and there was no warning about that whatsoever. So all that to say, Marco, I don't know yet. I will, you know, make the inquiries at the ministry, but unfortunately has been my experience many, many times that the special needs programs are the last that are taken into consideration. You know, not in terms of numbers, yeah, we're talking about fewer students, but there are most vulnerable students, and it's a shame that, you know, this, but as soon as any of that information is available, Marco, we'll get it out, we'll get it on the website, and okay?
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry I
I
can't
find it-
tell you.
No,
Sorry.
it's fine. I mean, it's funny that our students are the only ones who are, you know, to whom we have to offer services now, but we weren't mentioned in their press release. I don't know if the minister checks his Twitter account, but I did ask him on Twitter what his plans are for WTP.
Good
So
for
if he
you,
answers me, I'll
Marco.
let you know.
Good for you. And I will again, and you know, I got a couple years yet, but I'm getting close enough to retirement now that I really don't care what I say. The fellow that's in charge of WTP at the ministry is not doing a very good job. And if you want to, you know, write to the special needs department of the ministry and say, look, you know, why hasn't WTP been supported better? Why hasn't Challenges in CAS been supported better? You know, it's a shame what's happened. But anyways, I better stop now. Okay, 'cause it's already hot today, and I'll get, you know, my blood pressure will go up. And
I'll interrupt Marcia, that way she doesn't say anything more. I just, my little add-on to both Joanna and Marcia's comments, Marco, is that, yeah, I would echo Joanna's, you know, what it might look like next year. But the other piece is that the Sec 4-5 thing, it's not a blanket Sec 4-5 have to be, you know, a little bit online and, you know, back and forth and so on and so forth. That's not a blanket sort of situation. In our school board, we actually have some small schools that may actually be able to, depending on the numbers of students and depending on the Sec 4-5 situation was put in so that those Sec 4-5 kids were doing a whole variety of different pathways of science and math and options and maybe even reach back to get another course. Those kids are kind of starting to get more diverted within the high school, and so therefore they couldn't stay together as a group. Whereas Joanna's example is that, you know, our guys are, well, first of all, they're taking a different curriculum altogether and they're on a different schedule. And so most of our schools actually are able to then keep those students as a group. And our students won't be suited by sort of a couple of days in and a couple of days online and so on and so forth, specifically to the program and specifically also to, again, related to our year 2s and year 3s who need support in the work placement. So, you know, if your school is making some sort of, or school board is making some sort of a blanket decision, all your kids, as Marcia said, these are these are you know, they are classified as secondary Sec 2. So, you know, they are 15 and older. Don't make an argument that actually that, you know, potentially another organizational model could be used, because it shouldn't just be simply a blanket, oh, those are 4-5s, they should be doing this type of thing. I know we're very early on in this announcement and everyone has to figure out what that looks like, but you as a teacher now potentially have an option in the next little while to talk a little bit about those, you know, what that model will look like going in terms of planning, and that would be something that I would champion if you could. So.
You're exactly right, Steve. Exactly right. And I mean, Marco, you work at a big school, but there are a lot of smaller schools throughout the province, so there are going to be a whole lot of different scenarios. So.
Yeah, I just, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Marcia. And your question's a good one, Marco, but like a lot of times, like a lot of cases in these trying times, we don't have answers for WOTP because we are often not necessarily our last thought, if a thought at all, which I think speaks to a bigger issue, which has been highlighted by COVID-19. And if we, no, I won't get into it, but if we want to talk about systemic discrimination in general in our system, this is a case in point of that within our most vulnerable population of students, again, only being thought of because their advocates, i.e. us, are asking about them, right? Anyway, I think that says a lot without saying too much, but it's definitely an issue. And I think it's also important for us as a community to continue to advocate for our students within our schools, our school boards, and at the provincial level, which I hope you all know that Marcia and I, especially Marcia, does on a daily basis in the DSREA to try and get answers and keep and continually bring these issues to the forefront, because we hear you, we hear your concerns, and we want to support you, and most importantly, we want to support our students. So that's just an aside. On that, I think that is all I had in terms of today, specifically for end of year evaluation and reporting. Like I had mentioned, we will post this we'll post the PowerPoint as well as the recording. But just with the aside that this is what we know as of now, and that things could potentially change in terms of evaluation and reporting for term 3 on the report card. We do know that the certification information final, that's the end of the story for that, that's been put out. So those slides in terms of the hours for kids this year getting certified in pre-work training and semi-skilled, that stuff is good to go. So there's no questions about that. But in terms of that final marking on that final report card, this is the best information we have at this point. So that's all for today. If you had any specific questions that you wanted to bring up for a student, then we can talk about those after if other people have other things to do. Go ahead, Micheline.
Yeah.
Okay, so for those of you who I haven't met already, my name is Micheline and I do the coordination for mentoring. And one of the things I do is keep track of who attends. For the record, not that we're doing attendance in that way, but it's so I usually have to know your school board, and we've started also doing the school as well. So that's why I'm asking for what is your school board and what is your school. And we have one mystery person, and I know I recognize you, but it's DM.
EM.
Then I asked you to turn on your video. So, oh, and your mute is on too. I'm gonna unmute you if I can. Oh, there you go.
Hi, sorry, I was late. My computer decided to reboot, so I'm on an iPad, and I've never Zoomed on an iPad, so.
Have a funny.
Yeah. So
can you?
And I can't find the chat.
It's Jennifer Charm from Sir Wilfrid Laurier School Board. I can vouch.
Okay, I knew I recognized you.
You've seen our Dean create, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So I thank
Thanks,
you guys.
Joe.
No problem for being here today. Again, if you have any further questions, concerns, comments moving forward, or you want someone to chat with, a final mark or whatever, Marcia and I are always available for you. So you can email myself or Marcia. And if you have any pertinent questions you would like to stay on right now, because we have about 15 minutes left in regards to a specific case that you're struggling with, we'll stay on until those questions are answered. But otherwise, have a lovely day. Enjoy the sunshine, and I look forward to seeing you at the next mentoring session, in person or online. Sorry, Martin.
Sean's got his hand up, I think.
Just where will it be posted, the video and or?
All of our WOTP materials are posted on the Learn website, in the WOTP section.
Yeah, so if that's new to you, you go to Learn, you go to Subjects, and you scroll down, you'll see all the different subject areas. You keep scrolling down. We're near the bottom, you'll see WOTP, and you can click on either pre-work or the semi-skilled. And then on the page, you'll see there are purple banners, and the things for mentoring are in the section called Professional Development. The materials, Joanna's overviews of the different courses are under the purple banner called Teaching and Learning Resources. The list of online resources for WOTP is in curated resources. If you open those sections up, there's lots of material there for WOTP, but anything we do in a mentoring session goes under professional development. And you could go back and look at materials from our first WOTP mentoring session when we started in the fall of 2011. So it's all there.
Okay, thank you.
You had a question? No? All right, so are there any other questions? Jen? No, you're just fixing stuff? Okay. All right, so if there's no other questions, then I wish, yeah, sorry, you're cutting in and out.
Hi, Joanna.
Yes.
Just a quick question.
Oh, Rosa, okay, hi.
Yes, hi, how are you?
Good, thanks, you.
Just a quick question. We were looking at over course trades, and I was wondering, is the ministry gonna add more trades? Like, we have students who are able to file, enter data in the computer, and we were looking in the trades, and we didn't find anything specific that fell under that those tasks. And I was wondering if, like, entering computer data or entering data in a computer or some sort of filing, is that something that, or any other task, because some of our students can do way more than some of the tasks that are there. And if the ministry is looking into adding more stuff for our kids, especially in the semi-skilled trade.
Yeah, this is a great question, Rosalba, and it's been asked numerous times, especially, I mean, just, you know, film developer is one of the things, or video store clerk, but I don't even think video stores exist anymore. I definitely think there's a lack of representation for technology that exists in 2020, and considering that a lot of these skills are, kids rather, are skilled in that, but, you know, because most of the students are way better at it than we are. But that being said, I think from what I know and understand in terms of the directory, it's specifically also tied to the courses that they're offering kids at the vocational training level, as well as what is offered, I believe, like, it follows like a framework in Quebec. So it's, I hear you and you're not wrong, but we can't like invent semi-skilled trades that don't then move along in the vocational training sector. That's as far as I understand it.
But in the vocational sector, some ask for Sec 4 math, and some kids are not gonna go there just having the Sec 3 and having the experience, and without going to Voc Ed. I feel bad because, you know, they're put at a disadvantage.
Yeah, I hear you that the passing of the Sec 4 is probably not a reality for a lot of these students, but they could do work that mirrors that with the experience that they do have, right? Like, I think we've seen that with kids, and I'll just take another example. I've taught a lot of kids who are very skilled working on cars because of their, you know, ties to their family and their experience from when they were very young doing it. But there's not much apart from tire installer, which is even in question at this point, that they could get for training for a semi-skilled trade. And if they wanted to become a mechanic, the entry requirements for that are like secondary 4, secondary 5, right? Like a high school diploma. So, you know, go ahead, Marcia.
I'll jump in. I mean, I understand your frustration, Rosa, and anyone who's ever been involved with the WOTP has that frustration in that the Directory of Semi-Skilled Trades, that's kind of the Bible for what, you know, what happens in WOTP. The problem is that the trades that do appear there, and as Joanna said, sometimes over the years, different ones have disappeared, been removed as well. It's a very, very long vetting process of deciding what goes on there. And it's like many, many things are taken into consideration. First of all, as Joanna mentioned, they don't want anything that could somehow be construed as being part of a vocational training program. So you can't do that. There are a lot of issues where the unions have to be consulted, because the unions will say, well, in a specific job title or job category, you can do this or you cannot do that, and a person can be on a work site or not be. Like the Directory of Semi-Skilled Trades is also used for adults who do a sort of equivalent of WOTP in the adult sector. Excuse me. There are a lot of things that are considered in terms of, you know, a trade appearing there. And sometimes suggestions have been made and it's taken a couple of years or even more before it actually even appears on the site. Now, the thing is, you know, Joanna's right, and you are, Rosa, too, you know, technology is very much underrepresented. And yes, there are kids who could, you know, be mechanics, who are never going to pass Sec 4 English, French, and Math, which is what you need to get in vocational training. But we have a couple of back doors for WOTP. First of all, there is the bridge from semi-skilled into vocational training. That's, we had a workshop about that about a year ago. Students who are successful in training for a semi-skilled trade, and you can show that they've acquired Sec 2 competencies for English and Math, can go into, it's a smaller number, but a certain number of vocational trade program where the normal requirements are Sec 3. So they're getting kind of a buy, getting in with only Sec 2. And if they go in and do that program and successfully, they can then do another vocational training program. And so there are backdoor ways in for WOTP students. Okay, so that's something to remember as well. But, you know, and I was talking to some colleagues in the French sector, and one of them said, oh, I've got some great ideas for new trades that she's going to propose. And because of the content, her one was, you've heard all about the training for the préposé. Well, she's proposing sort of an assistant to a préposé, could be a semi-skilled trade. And another one that she was proposing is grocery store order preparation. I mean, every time I go in Maxi or IGA, I see the, you know, young people going around and they're fulfilling orders. Now, she's going to propose those to the person who's in charge of this. It might be 2 or 3 years before those ever appear, or they might be nixed because of XYZ reasons that I don't know. So, you know, it is unfortunate, but we have to sort of put the emphasis on, okay, yes, there are a handful, there are things we would like to see there that aren't. We have to work with what is there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosa. And Steve wants.
Is there any way that, like you said, your colleague in the French sector is going to bring these possible opportunities forward? Is there any way that like we could do that? Like, who do we, either teachers or consultants or myself or you, Marcia, like how do we propose potential new semi-skilled trades?
Okay, there used to be a mention right on the website, on the direct, it said, if you want to propose new things, contact so-and-so. They've taken that away. But to me, that doesn't need, as far as I'm concerned, we should still have the right. I mean, if I'm not, you know, there's the person who's in charge of the WOTP dossier in special needs, and there's the person who is actually a contractual employee who, you know, does all the investigation, and I'll find out where we can send potential ideas. I'm not sure if we'd send them to one or the other or both. You know, I'll find that out, okay, and let you know.
I think Steve and then Alex.
Yeah, I'll just be brief, but Rosa, my battle with the directory is not new to both Joanna and Marcia, but I've learned that we need to work with the system that we actually have, and one of the way, and to be advocates for our students, and also send our students out to good placements for them, or good placements for their abilities. So I always talk to my work placement supervisors to not to dismiss a job because it's not on the directory, but to work around it. So if it's a semi-skilled student, that is an issue, because you do have to find something that actually they're going to be evaluated on the specific competencies for each single one of those things within one trade. So you might, as Joanna used the example of a mechanic, that kid who goes out to a mechanic might actually get a semi-skilled certificate in the tire installer, or we currently have that there, but it might actually be something different, making sure that he or she is competent in all those specific competencies. But then also they can also be competent at changing the transmission and working on a vehicle. And what I suggest is actually teachers can actually create their own the list of those specific competencies. They don't count, they don't go to the ministry, but none of those evaluations go to the ministry anyway. So that kid can still be evaluated on and valued. The stuff that he or she has done can then be valued, and those skills are still things that they're walking away with. And that's the more important point, is what they're actually. So when related to technology, you may have to be creative. If it's not on the directory, then you find something that actually is on the directory that they can be evaluated on, and then include all the technology pieces that they've actually done. And those things can then be used on a resume. Those can be used on, when references are used. And again, it's their packet of skills that they walk away with. So try not to just say, oh, it's not on the directory, you can't go there, you got to go to Tim Hortons. Let's try to find a way to actually, work around it, so you actually, those kids can still go out into those positions, and the directory is not restricting us in some of those higher level, if you like, and those students that actually can have those transferable skills that will get them jobs in the future. So there are ways of doing that. Just keep that.
Jennifer just made a brilliant point. That information can go in their job portfolio, and the job portfolio is part of the ELA program. Thanks. Yeah, good reminder, Jennifer.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone.
I think before we turn it to Alex, that, like Steve said, I mean, the certificate's obviously important, but I think all of us can probably know of some jobs that we have got based on word of mouth reference and our skill level, and not the marks that we received in university, or whether we were on the Golden Keys Society or whatever the case. It was because we had a skill, we demonstrated we were good at that skill, and we knew a person that could tell another person that we were good at that skill. So I think, like Steve had mentioned, it's important that you get those references, that you get that experience, and that we work around with what we got. But I would never, like Steve had mentioned, want to limit a kid's opportunities because of something as trivial as the directory of semi-skilled trades and the competencies listed within.
Yeah.
Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm in like a soup of competing emotions right now. It's heavy, man. It's heavy to be in this current circumstance. Just amplifying Martin's feelings regarding the systemic discrimination comment. This is an important conversation. The locomotive that is the runaway train of school has stalled, and we're left with track in our hands. Like, aren't I supposed to keep laying it? And it's like, can we pause and look at this thing? This game of certification and gaining access to the power structure of our society through schooling. Can we look at this and ask, is this the highest education that we can imagine? I feel like, I understand why we need a Ministry of Education and why we need documents and directories and protocols and policies. I understand that. However, the longer I'm in this profession, the longer I recognize that whatever is visioned in the past somehow can't catch up to the current reality that is rapidly evolving. And I'm tired of waiting for the system to reform itself. It won't. It will never do so totally. And not that there will ever be an evolution of its incarnation that will stay relevant forever. It's like, it needs to keep evolving. And is that going to come from the top or the bottom? I feel like our students are the very embodiments of the school system's failure to accommodate all human beings, and that puts us in a unique position, because we're advocates for those who are the very like who embody the very evidence of the brokenness of the system. And that just wrenches my heart on some levels, because it feels like all we can do with these guys, all we can imagine is how to get them a job. But I think the larger thing that a lot of our students offer is who they be. Who they be is so magnificent. And that wouldn't necessarily be represented in their, you know, through the lens of work. I know it's a work-oriented training program, but is that what we're all about? And by we, I mean our society, our polis. Like, are we only looking through this lens and productivity is the beacon? Like, I long for a wider scope. I long for this to get turned inside out. So thank you for letting me lament a little bit, because I've been like, I feel a little heartbroken, to be honest, right now. And thank you for this opportunity, Joanna and Marcia, to keep meeting together, because, and one last thing I'll say is that I'm attempting to bring together a group of educators, students, stakeholders in a sort of think tank to start autopsying the system, because it's the first time in I don't know how many decades that the system has kind of ground to a halt on some level and has been transposed to a new platform, you know, online teaching. So I think it's a great time to start looking at like what has happened, what is happening with our school system. So if anyone's interested in that, I would love to talk to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Alex.
Martin?
I think right now it would be good to go and watch that WOTP video that IES put together, because, you know, it is, I'm totally an outsider here, but I see the education of these kids is a lot more rounded than just work. But anyway, it's a great video to get us all cheered up again.
True.
I think Martin had a comment. Thank you, Micheline. And then Jean-Francois?
Who was first?
Martin?
No, I'm good. I'm good, thanks.
Thank you, Martin.
Okay, I feel bad to come back to that, but I just need to validate something regarding pre-work training year 2. They have 300 hours normally to do this year. It's been lowered, if I remember. If they can't make the amount of hour, if they didn't make it, is it non-evaluated at that point? Or do they have to do it next year to complete what's missing?
Well, like I had said at the beginning, for kids who are currently in pre-work 2 and are going to be certified next year in pre-work 3, the BSR next year again will have to be amended to accommodate that change in hours for next year. But I think your question is, for this year in work skills in pre-work 2, do you put an A, B, C, or D if they weren't able to complete that 300 hours, right? Because that's what we're looking at. Yeah. That's a great question. Marcia, what do you think?
Okay, I would think that you know, it's not going to matter ultimately for certification, because we don't know. Yeah, okay, because we don't know, because we don't.
It's administratively speaking only.
Yeah, we have no idea what stages will look like next year. So, but to me, in my mind, that's the same as any teacher, whether they're a grade 4 teacher or a grade 2, Sec 2 math teacher, that they're sitting there and saying, well, based on what happened in term 1 and term 2 and up to March 13th, and then anything that potentially did happen online, do I, using my judgment as the
judgment call, basically.
Teacher's judgment. Okay. If I, you know, and if in my mind, if the kid made an effort and was going to the stage whatever number of hours, because not every school starts the stage on October 1st or October 5th, you know, the hours are going to vary. If the teacher's judgment, you know, in my mind, the kid has passed.
Okay, that's also what I was thinking, but I really wanted to double check because
No, for
that
sure.
surprise after.
Teacher judgment all the way on that.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Thank you. All right, so we're kind of over time here a bit, but if you want to stay on because you have a specific question you wanted to shoot by me or Marcia, you can stay on. If not, have a lovely rest of the day and a great weekend. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
Joanna.
Take care. Nice meeting you, those of you who are new. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Thank you very much. I appreciated it. Thank you.
Yes, thank
meeting
you all.
you, Martin.
Thanks.
Nice meeting you. Marty.
Marty.
Marty, okay.
Nice to meet you guys.
Bye, Marty.
Bye.